Okay, thanks so much for having me today at Games for Change. I do think this might be a little bit different from some of the talks that you've seen today. It's sort of a deep dive into an artistic research project. So I'm a research-based artist and professor of art at Carnegie Mellon. Today I'm going to talk about the research, art, and politics behind The Game, a video game I made based on online pickup artist communities and male seduction forums, which I'll get into more detail in a bit. There is some difficult content in this presentation, so I'll try to give warnings when we get to it. So before I talk specifically about The Game, I just want to briefly touch on the two projects that directly informed it. For 4 years, I created performative interventions inside the multiplayer online role-playing video game World of Warcraft. And so instead of killing enemies and getting badass equipment like I had for the 6 years prior to the founding of the council, as this council, I started traveling to highly populated virtual towns in the game space to discuss the ways in which women were treated in the game with other players. WoW has had a player base that's pretty notorious for being hostile toward women, members of the queer community, and people of color, and this was especially true on the servers that I played on for many years. This project overall focused on bringing people together and trying to create a presence and public visibility for the issues of exclusivity that marginalized players faced in the space by meeting and talking about it regularly. In the midst of that long-term project, I started another, also focused on facilitating dialogue within niche internet communities that are often not inclusive to women. Starting in 2014, I became interested in a figure named Roosh V. His writing and his ideology started coming up during conversations with WoW players who identified themselves to me as men's rights activists or members of the manosphere. In case you're not familiar, Roosh V is a professional pickup artist. He's been called the most infamous misogynist on the internet, and you know, he has a lot of competition there. Roosh V spends his time traveling around the world teaching men how to perform in particular ways in order to have sex with as many women as possible across geographic, language, and cultural barriers as quickly as possible. He writes a series of seduction-centric travel guides called Bang, Day Bang, Bang Iceland, Bang Poland, Bang Ukraine, and so on. One of his community fans made this image, not me. After reading so much of his writing for his devoted community of followers, one thing really stuck out to me. In Roosh's accounts of his sexual exploits, the perspectives of the women he's explicitly talking about in his books and blogs are never represented. So I decided that I wanted to create a web and book project through which I had hoped to give the supposedly thousands of women that Roosh V has had sexual exchanges with, using the extremely aggressive strategies outlined in his books and blogs, an opportunity to anonymously report their experiences. After pursuing mainstream media distribution of my call for these women, it occurred to me that Roosh knew about my project as he wrote about it on his Twitter account. And his awareness of the project changed it for me. He became less of this sort of abstract villain that I was free to run a smear campaign on, and more of a person or more of a complex subject. I decided that I should stop mimicking the shock media tactics that his own community would use and move toward investigating further into actually trying to understand his motivations and also the appeal that he and his practice held for his growing community of followers, many of whom now make up what we politically call the alt-right. So I pursued getting Roosh V to do an interview with me via Skype. This took months of email negotiating. The video interview ended up being unintentionally 2 hours long and was a very exhausting performance on my end. I'm gonna play 1 2-minute clip from the interview to give you a sense of what the 2 hours were like. And there is some sexually explicit talk in this clip, just so you know. Okay, here we go. Let's imagine that I do somehow find 20 women that have slept with you. What do you think these women might say about the seduction process and your sexual performance?
I would say that they would probably say that I approached them with good energy. I didn't scare them. I made them feel comfortable. I didn't come on really strong. but at the same time, I didn't come in with such a low energy that they weren't interested. I'm really good at keeping a conversation going, even if the girl is not giving me a lot back. I make everything feel natural, from how I touch and kiss, and I mean, it's rarely the point where a girl will have to stop me and say, no, I don't like it when you touch me there. Because I can read them. I know, but based on how they act, how they talk, how they move, when they want me to do the next step. And after sex, I get lazy because now I already got most of what I wanted. So I just want a girl to have the lowest possible expectations. So I don't have a day where I don't want to try. So it's actually a blessing and a curse to be good in bed. But I'm not. So.
You mentioned your orgasm is of primary importance, and that you don't go down on women.
Right.
That's true. Can I ask why?
Because nature has deemed the male orgasm to be more important. If right now a magic cloud of gas surrounds the earth and infected girls and prevented them from ever having a female orgasm again, the human species would go on still. But if this cloud of gas only affected men and prevented the male orgasm, what would happen? The human species is done. It is freaking done. Therefore, nature, not me, nature has declared that the male orgasm is essential to life, to life. But the female orgasm is like a cherry on top. You know, if she gets it, hey, that's great, yummy. But if not, it doesn't matter. So I believe in what nature has said about it.
I know there's a lot to go into there, but I'm just going to move past it. There's 2 more hours of it and a very long rant that he goes on about my masculine haircut, but we'll move past it. So the text in this video is from one of the many emails I got daily over the course of the project from Roosh's community members. This project ended up taking on a lot of forms. Roosh was initially enthusiastic about my search, likely because of the attention it brought him, and the project in general. And his community initially appreciated the 2-hour-long interview because I acknowledged that I was a self-identified feminist inclined to disagree with just about everything he said, but was willing to have a conversation with him and have civility with regards to my interview questions. However, as mainstream media continued to be interested in my search for his partners, his community became more and more frustrated that the media had an overall negative view of Roosh, despite me presenting an unedited 2-hour-long interview with him. His community debated my project and harassed me over email, social media, comment sections of mainstream news sites, and a massive and ongoing comment thread on the Roosh V forum, and additionally wrote threatening statements to employers, friends, peers, and colleagues in an attempt to discredit what I was doing. They let me know that they knew where I lived and worked, and continued to sexually harass me, sent me rape and death threats, and accused me of stalking Roosh. As the project continued to get more attention, Roosh himself also suggested that if I continued my search, he would sue me for libel. I go into the details about that in a performance that I do within this project. I'm not talking about this particular issue to play up a victim narrative, as I recognize myself as an active agent who started the whole thing. But as a performer who had seen real impact on the space in World of Warcraft as a result of the conversations I facilitated with the council, I naively applied some of the same logic and strategies to this project without realizing the primary difference in my own position and relationship to those two spaces. In World of Warcraft, I was recognizable as a long-term, high-level member of that community, with high-level gear only obtained through years of commitment and expertise within that game, clearly a participant and not an outsider. In Roosh V's manosphere, I'm simply an enemy, a symbol of everything wrong in today's world to them, someone who operates against their values, and someone who, regardless of attempts to remain civil, and even at times acting with something that did sincerely feel like empathy. If you do try to follow me on Twitter at Angela Washko, you will notice that my account is private. This is a really long project to explain, but it ultimately included multimedia storytelling performances, art installations, videos, a YouTube-based interactive dungeon crawler game, and a lot of writing. And it's somewhat easy to find. So I'm going to move on to the game, and hopefully you'll see how this led to that project. Toward the end of the Bang project with Roosh, something I felt was getting in the way of the work was my performance role. The project became very much about my own experience operating in this field. In my most recent project, I'm putting myself out of the spotlight and making the project less about my personal mediation of an intervention into these spaces and more about creating an embodied way for people to understand the tactics and ideologies of these manosphere seduction communities. There's so much inaccessible and coded information in this field, and a lot of it is very painful to process, especially if you're a woman. And so with all of the experience I now have mapping this field, as a researcher, I've been able to put myself in the position to filter it all into a game scenario so that one might actually walk away being able to make sense of it and hopefully, or ideally, develop strategies to respond to it. After my interview with Roosh was distributed widely, followers of other seduction gurus reached out to me to tell me that Roosh's variety of pickup art was much more extreme and much more misogynistic than other types that they argued were more focused on teaching men confidence and self-improvement to help level the dating playing field. I thought that that seemed like a valid point, so I decided to take a deeper look into the wide variety of pickup artist gurus, or seduction coaches, as they've reframed themselves, and the differences between the types of pickup art that they're teaching, and ultimately make a game about them. Here's where I'm just going to give a warning. In this part of the presentation, you'll see mentions of sexual assault and some evidence of non-consensual behavior. So if you're sensitive to this or have experienced trauma around any of this, I won't be offended if you have to leave. So the title of The Game is based on the best-selling 2005 book by Neil Strauss, The Game, which was the first mainstream primer into this world, which originated as a couple of guys with a Web 1.0 community forum sharing tips on how to pick up women, and turned into multi-million-dollar seduction companies for some. The Game has been primarily shown at this point in art exhibition, festival, and conference contexts, though there are plans for wider distribution. The band Shoo Shoo composed the soundtrack to The Game, so it has what I would say pretty considered dark and intense musical score. I will play 2 seconds of it. For tone. Okay. In developing The Game, I present the different seduction techniques of famous pickup artists and allow those pickup artists to speak for themselves through their own work and put players into the position of interacting with them in a common location for pickup art, a bar. Players, regardless of personal gender identity, are put into the position of experiencing a common scenario that femme-presenting people experience, having their personal space invaded when it's unwelcome by men who feel entitled to it. The first pickup artist who approaches you in the game is based primarily on research material from infamous pickup artist Julian Blanc's first major multi-DVD training program, Pimp. This is what the Pimp program costs today at a drastically reduced price, to give you a sense of the scale and access of this. All of the dialogue by the pickup artists in the game is constructed from actual word-for-word advice written by these pickup artists in their books, websites, and DVD programs, and also situations from their own hidden camera footage that they sell to their devoted followers. A lot of these coaching materials are prohibitively expensive and not available in full online to keep people who aren't looking to learn from them from finding out about them. But I got some like grants, so I bought like all of them. I'm going to show an example of an excerpt from one of Julian Blanc's videos, including an in-field hidden camera video. And I just want to say, you'll see some non-consensual behavior here. It's not sexually graphic, but I will say that it is pretty disturbing. So just to give you a second to decide if you want to see that. Okay.
So when I'm like, you know what, it's after party, let's go, I'm gonna throw in the word now. Okay, like, you know what, after party, now. Boom, and I will order and command now. Now. Okay, listen, you don't have to if you don't want to, but let's go now. Okay, we get along right, after party, now. Adventure, now. Let's go, now. This second, now. This second, now. Okay, I'm gonna hammer that shit in. I'll also do like, you know what, after party, because otherwise I have to go. AKA, it has to happen now. Okay, so keep that in mind. Take the responsibility off of the girl and create a sense of urgency.
No, we're very nice guys.
No.
But Julian is
Hey,
we have so much in common.
Apologies.
What do we have in common? What do
Pleasure
you
to
mean?
meet you.
Connection, we're just like,
Ridiculous.
from her. She won't see. I'll hide it. I have massive shoulders. She won't see.
Get out of town.
That's what she said. Okay, real fast, real fast.
Oh my god. Oh my
A
god.
real kiss, not shit.
You're
She's not.
crazy.
Okay, we already kissed. It's too late. Give a real kiss.
You're crazy.
Redemption. It's like a video game. Redemption. Are you gonna cheat on a shitty kiss?
No.
That's a good point.
Am I gonna cheat on a shitty
You already
kiss?
cheated. You already cheated. You
Yeah.
cheated on a fiance on a shitty kiss. Is that really what you want?
Where
2 minutes.
Where did you guys come
Wait,
from?
can I just hug you goodbye? I'll hug you goodbye.
You can give me a hug,
Goodbye.
okay?
2 minutes. 2 minutes.
No, 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 no,
2 minutes. 2 minutes.
no.
2 minutes. Okay, kiss me.
No, 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 no.
Kenzie, my friend's talking to me. So this pretty much covers, you know, like aligning the emotional side of her brain with the logical side of her brain.
That in the video program is also framed as a successful engagement, I just want to say. So I showed that video to illustrate that this moment presented in Julian's hidden camera footage is represented in the game. As a player, if you continue to engage with him to the point that you end up outside of the bar and are invited to leave the venue with him, even when you push back, you may be physically moved around and touched sexually without your consent. This is not me inventing what Julian is like in any way, but presenting him and his behaviors in the way that he's presented them himself and has suggested them as a template for many hundreds of thousands of online fans to follow. After each interaction in the game, you're prompted with a series of options. Generally, the options include a tonal range from being enthusiastic, to being snarky, to being polite, to resorting to being aggressive in your rejection. Each option results in a different outcome, illustrating how the pickup artist has described ways of handling the different ways that women respond to them. Each pickup artist handles rejection and women's attitudes differently. For example, and this is a bit of a spoiler alert, but if you play through, you'll notice that Julian will persist until you physically push him away, whereas even the slightest hint of attitude or confidence will signal to Luke that you aren't submissive and therefore not worth his time. Roosh V is called Luke in this game, by the way, because he was caught by talk show hosts in Russia using a pseudonym name of Luke, so I also honor that in this game. Structurally, the game follows the mystery method M3 model, which all of the pickup artists in the game have adopted in their own practices and coaching materials. It's a diagram of that model. And this model guides the game's timeline when you play it. So broken into 3 stages: attract, comfort, and seduce. This model outlines a pickup art hypothesis of structurally what needs to happen for a successful conquest to take place as quickly as possible. If we had 30 more minutes, I would go into detail about it, but we don't, so moving on. Following that structure, as a player and as the target of pickup artists' attention, you can make a broad range of decisions in the game, from opting to hook up with different pickup artists in multiple locations to attempting to get away from them immediately. This is the path that most players take. In constructing this game, I didn't want to make the point, though, necessarily escape, and I hope that players, if they aren't triggered by it, do experiment with seeing what a successful conquest looks like from the perspective of each of the pickup artists. The game never slut-shames the player by any means, and that's really important to me, and also allows you to turn the tables and pursue multiple pickup artists yourself. I've tried to depict not only the breadth of the field of pickup art in the game, but also the extent to which each of these gurus copy their moves from each other, highlighting how community-based and internet-driven the men's seduction field is. So here you see the TV's broken. There's a computer in my bedroom. There's this Vampire Diaries video you should see. I wanted to show you something in Google Earth. Sorry. As you play through more and more of the exchanges, it becomes clear that each pickup artist is actually just building off of one another's materials and tweaking it, rebranding it, and putting it back out into the world. The game was made from hundreds of handmade and digitally manipulated cyanotypes, some on ceramic and linoleum tiles like these, and others on watercolor paper like these. In some of the exhibition instances, I often exhibit the original cyanotypes as well. This is at Squeaky Wheel in Buffalo. And this is what it looks like when they're combined and altered and put into Python and whatnot. I really wanted the game to have a feel to it that was consistent with the emotional and psychological weight of the experience, and that's why I brought some of my background in more traditional art processes to the work rather than employing the all-digital sprite-based RPG look I originally planned. And working with Shushu on the audio component, I think also contributes to the tense, claustrophobic nature of a lot of the interactions. As I'm closing up here, I also want to say it's actually also quite funny. For example, Julian's obsessed with many vampire-based films and TV shows, and a lot of his pickup lines involve those things. Roosh tells this odd story about living off the land and growing only butter, lettuce, and organic watermelons. It's important to me that this game doesn't just highlight the danger embedded in these scenarios, but also the absurdity of some of the tactics as well. The game gives you an opportunity to slow down these practices and examine them closely, something you can't do when you're experiencing them in a physical bar. I frame the field in this heavy way for my talk because sometimes this field seems easy to dismiss as not real, and when I talk about the field and the work, I wanted to share with you some of the gravity of the situation by seeing it in practice. I'm interested in exploring the complexity of these spaces and fields and not flattening them in the way that mainstream media does, and instead mapping them out and making their complexities more accessible. By making these pickup art practices an embodied experience and putting players into the position of making decisions and walking through interactions, I think there are insights to be gained that wouldn't be gained by writing a novel about the field. The game comes in at 97,000 words, and if you've played through every possible scenario, it's the length of a 400-page book. So although writing a book about the field actually seems like an option, there's something important to me about being put into the position of experiencing these practices, slowing them down, and rather than reading from them at a distance. And last thing, I think that understanding these practices and why they're so appealing to so many men is instrumental in trying to dismantle them. There's a lucrative industry devoted to providing men with answers on how to interact with women. Unfortunately, many of these pickup artists have a monopoly on providing these answers. And these practices often disregard consent and rely on very outdated ideas around biological determinism, making assumptions about what women are naturally like that undermine the wide spectrum of ways that people present, live, and perform. Look out for the game at an institution near you, and hopefully online by the end of the summer. Thank you.